We need to plan our Skype. Remember, Title IX protects students in all educational programs that get money from the government, and even some private schools. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for contacting the National Women's Law Center. I understand you're starting a gender equality club in your high school and that you want to find out about Title IX.
But how can we interest other students? What can we tell them so they'll care about gender equity?
Well, they should care because even though we've come a long way since Title IX was passed over 40 years ago, we're not there yet. So sexual harassment, sexual assault, and more generally sex discrimination can happen to anyone, anytime. And unfortunately, we know that it's happening in schools across the country. Research shows, and we hear from parents and students regularly, that kids are leaving their schools because they do not feel safe. We also know that the long-term effects of sexual harassment and assault are far worse than people think. And Title IX is a federal law that prohibits sex discrimination in education programs that receive any federal money. And just like sex discrimination and harassment are not allowed in the workplace, they're not allowed in schools either. This includes all public schools and also some private schools that receive federal funding.
What happens if a student reports a sexual assault to the school?
Great question. Title IX requires schools to address sex discrimination and harassment right away. So, for example, if a student says they were sexually harassed or assaulted, the school has to investigate immediately and also protect the student from any further harassment while the investigation is going on. The school's job is to make sure the student's education continues without further harassment or hostility. And even if criminal charges are filed and the police says there was no crime committed, the school still has to investigate and protect the student.
So who makes sure the school follows Title IX?
Title IX is enforced mainly by the Office for Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education, which we typically call OCR. It's pretty simple to file a complaint with OCR if you believe your rights have been violated. There's an online form and anyone can file on your behalf.
Most kids in our school think that sexual harassment is something we have to put up with. How do we explain why they should do something about it?
It helps to explain that it can interfere with a student's ability to get an education. It can take a physical, emotional, educational, and even economic toll on students. Sexual harassment can lead to students dropping out of school, which makes it harder for them to go to college or get good jobs. And I think helping people understand the damage that sexual harassment causes can show them why it needs to be addressed in elementary and middle school, because it's much better to address it early and quickly before it gets worse.
Are some kids more likely to get sexually harassed than others?
Studies do show that girls, and especially girls of color and LGBTQ students, are more likely to suffer sexual harassment and violence.
Can you explain more about girls of color?
Sure. Girls of color face barriers such as attending schools with fewer academic and extracurricular opportunities. They also face more frequent and harsher discipline than white girls for similar offenses. They are facing higher rates of sexual harassment and violence, and also encounter stereotypes that may affect how school officials react to them.
Should our school have told us about Title IX? Especially because we're hearing more about sexual assault and Title IX in colleges. What should we know before going to college about Title IX?
Your school should definitely tell you about Title IX, not just who your Title IX coordinator is and how to contact that person, which is very important, but also about how to file a complaint if you feel you've been discriminated against, and what the school's process is for responding to complaints, and what your rights are. As we've talked about, it's important to teach kids as early as possible, about their rights to help address this very serious problem. And Title IX protects you in college as well. So learning about your rights before you go to college will help you if you face any sort of discrimination at that level.
I've heard about schools teaching consent, like how students should communicate before sexual activity. Does consent have anything to do with Title IX rights?
It is important that students learn about healthy relationships, but consent education is not a substitute for education about Title IX. For example, let's say a girl consents to sexual activity with her partner but later breaks up with that person. Then the partner retaliates by harassing her and creating a hostile school environment. The fact that she once consented doesn't matter. She's still protected under Title IX, and her school needs to address the harassment.
If our school had gender equity, what would it be like?
Well, it would be an environment where all students felt they could benefit from their education, regardless of their gender identity, or sexual orientation. The school would proactively address sexual harassment before it happens. They would train everybody in their community about what it is, how to report it, and what the school will do about it.
What can we do to make our school more like that?
You can make sure that you know your rights, how to contact your Title IX coordinator, how to report sexual harassment, and what your school's process is for handling sexual harassment. And if any of these things aren't clear, you should ask your school officials to give you more information or explain. You can also learn more online from various groups about Title IX. You can go to OCR's website or the National Women's Law Center or Stop Sexual Assault in Schools and other organizations. These groups can help you if your school is lacking the necessary information.
Thanks. That's our last question for now.
Great. Let us know if you have more questions when your Gender Equality Club starts. And this is really important and great work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.